Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Woo-hoo.
Hello, welcome to Conversations with SOTU. I'm Adrienne Metcalf.
And I'm Josh Schwartzbeck.
Josh is a professional channel, a medium, and he channels the consciousness we call SOTU. He's been doing this for over 20-some years, and we're in the midst of a long conversation with SOTU about life and about humanity and about where we're all going. So we're going to continue that conversation today. I hope you stay with us. Are you ready to channel?
I'm ready. So here we go.
Here we go.
Very easy process for me if you haven't watched this before. It'll only take a few seconds, and SOTU will be here, and you'll probably forget that I was ever here. So here we go. All right. Hello, dear ones. We are SOTU, and this is Conversations with SOTU. And this is Adrienne. Hello, Adrienne. How are you today?
Oh, it's been a rockin' and rollin' day.
Yes, it certainly has, hasn't it?
Already.
What would you like to cover today in our conversation?
Well, we had a conversation. We had a question from our audience, from a friend of ours. So I'd like to read you that question so that I get it clear and accurate as to what they're asking. So this sort of takes off from our last show, and we start there. This last show brought out how some beings who incarnate for our food see us as gods.
We were talking about the dynamic of beings that would incarnate as a food source, and we were speaking of the dynamic as being one of the most giving things that you can do.
As a consciousness.
As a consciousness, absolutely,
Certainly.
absolutely so. To incarnate as a food source. And also, it is a, what shall we say, a leap forward in consciousness. It's a way to shortcut a dynamic of consciousness. Let's say you come in as a meat source, a cow or a goat or a rabbit or a fish even, in that sort of sense. You come into the dynamic of incarnation, you have the life that you live through that dynamic, and then you pass over, but as your body is consumed, as you are consumed, you become part of the consciousness of the host. So if you want to go from fish to human being, it is in a way, it can be a shortcut.
It's interesting. All right.
Right, so continue with the question, please.
All right, so this question says, then, I see how God is only as good as we are, partly due to our behavior and partly due to our limited ability to perceive that level of divinity.
Or the inability to perceive God, or what the true nature of God, Goddess, all that is actually is.
So we do have certain limits of our vision that...
Well, certainly so. You project your own form onto the divine. You project your own dynamic onto the divine. You know, what is the biblical phrase that you are created in the image of God? Well, you are created in the image of God in the sense that you have all of the manifestation abilities, all of the creative abilities of God, Goddess, all that is. You have just forgotten how to use the machine. You have just forgotten how to use the mechanics. And in fact, everything is divine. How can it not be?
It's true. We tend to make artificial limitations.
That's right. You tend to think that for example, this table is not divine, or this plant is not the divine. And yet we would suggest to you that this plant perhaps understands divinity much better than you do.
They have a different experience of it.
Absolutely so. And the question ultimately was, and the phrase was, that the plant will see the animal as God, and the animal will see the human as God. It doesn't mean that you are seeing the dynamic of the same sort of divinity. What you are seeing is the plant, because it cannot move, because it is rooted in one place, will see a being, an animal that can move around, as way beyond them, way more than them. So then they will see that dynamic, they will treat it as God. And so the animal who is fed, especially a domesticated animal that is fed by humans, and will see, because of the ability of humans, they can see that, they can perceive that, and so they see the humans as God.
So the question that automatically comes from that is, who then, we might encounter some sort of consciousness that has abilities that are beyond ours, and we might think that they're God.
That's right. The natural tendency would be that you would see them as God. And so, you know, go back into the dynamics of human history, and, you know, there are rumors of interference, rumors of assistance throughout many millennium, and throughout many experiences and many fables of the human experience. And so, you know, would you not see them as God? Is that not the big risk? You know, we have talked about the dynamic of what is occurring in your world right now, and we would suggest to you that there will be ever increasing dynamics of disclosure of beings from other realms, other sets, other planetary beings.
Right.
But they are here to watch you do something that they have never been able to do, and that's move as a species from a more primitive dynamic of competition and comparison, of survival of the fittest, to a place of transformation, where you transform yourselves. Instead of measuring yourself by how well the best of you are doing in your world, you begin to measure yourself by how well the least of you are doing in your world. And that dynamic of that shift, that change begins to change the whole thing. Now, that's not to say that other species have not evolved, have not moved into that place of what shall we call advanced civilization. But it has always been by necessity.
So we have that opportunity now.
Right. You have an opportunity to move into the dynamics of advanced civilization.
Planetary advanced civilization of an entire species, not so much who's this nation, who's this race, who's this continent, who's anything, the entire species.
Right, but we are not talking about globalism as it's being presented in the form now.
Because it's
power over.
It has some agendas of competition and comparison.
Correct.
Unless we are willing to see the limits of competition and comparison and choose to move beyond it, we're still playing in the same old ballpark.
Correct. So the point of the whole dynamic was ultimately to see that there is divinity in every sort of movement. You know, we hate to say it, even Hitler was divine.
We could name lots of names.
And Vladimir Putin is clearly divine.
That are current and historical.
And so is Donald Trump.
We're all playing our parts.
Well, that's just the point, isn't it? Nothing is really happening by coincidence.
No. And there are great opportunities to see things clearly, to see what we don't wish to do anymore, who we don't wish to be, and therefore start to define who we do wish to be.
Well, isn't that the point? Aren't you seeing all over the place? Aren't you seeing everywhere in your world what not to do?
Absolutely.
Who not to be?
Absolutely.
Well, just take the opposite reflection and you'll do fine.
Well, it becomes a roadmap
Well,
of sorts.
Well, it becomes more than a roadmap. It becomes a template of behavior, a way to begin to interact with each other and with your world with inherent fairness.
Right, because if we step away from the roles because they're too limiting for who many of us wish to be, if we step away from the rules because many of them are unfair or no longer apply, what is going to replace that to guide our behaviors? We could use fairness. Because I believe most people know what's...
Excuse us for a moment, but you have never allowed yourselves as a species to move out of that dynamic in the past 250,000 years or so of competition and comparison. And that has been a purposeful journey. Please do not get us wrong. We are not saying humanity is bad and wrong for... No, you're not bad and wrong. It's been part of growing up. It's been part of having that dynamic of experience. But if you understand that, you stand, and this is all of the reflections. So many of you who are terrified, so many of you who react with a great deal of fear and animosity on a daily basis every time you hear these be afraid, be very afraid, and you allow yourselves to react in that sort of way rather than asking yourself a question, is something really threatened here? And if something is really threatened, then you can go into threat assessment and you can work to mitigate that dynamic of that threat. But if nothing is really threatened, and that's what's going on in your world right now, there are so many things that are being presented to you all that are intended to scare you, that are intended to keep you in a place where you are not using your rational mammalian brain, where you are only in a place of fight or flight, a place of black and white, a place of reaction, where you are at each other's throats. You are one, dear ones. There are no Republicans, there are no Democrats, there are only human beings.
It will be quite extraordinary when we allow ourselves to feel that. But anyway, we'll continue with...
We're not done with this question?
Oh, no. There's much more to go. All right. So we start out with these limitations, meaning our limitations on the ability to perceive other levels of divinity.
The limitations are only in belief. The limitations are only in the dynamic of belief. In fact, you are all born with the ability to create, to manifest out of thin air. It's just been kind of a conspiracy against you to be able to keep you in a place of forgetfulness around that dynamic. Because if you take that responsibility, if you claim that ability for yourself, well, everything will change.
Conspiracy by whom?
Well.
Why would we deprive you?
Why would we deprive you of the adventure of discovery?
All right. So we're getting finally to the question from our friend. My question is, how can we expand ourselves to have a more accurate experience of our divine role and to become more aligned with the godly energetic pattern? There's more questions after that, but I'll let you go with that.
Well, but how can you not be aligned with the divine? How can you have a non-divine experience? If you're aligning yourself more with the dynamic of the divine, you're taking more responsibility for your reality. Are you not?
So maybe it's a matter of having where we put our focus and awareness.
It's how you see yourself. Do you see yourself as good enough? Do you see
Depends
yourself
on the day.
That's right. Do you see yourself as a divine being manifested in a physical body? that you don't have to be perfect, but that you're enough already. You know,
Depends on the day.
if you go from that place, then how can you align yourself more clearly with the divine? You can read the reflections of your reality and respond to them.
That's for next week's show. All right. Well, let's continue on with her questions. And thank you, by the way. It's great getting questions from the audience. Please send some to the television station or to our website.
Either that or we have to keep making it up.
Which we're not in this case. If we do create this expansion, first in ourself, of course, and hopefully this ripples into the world. Does it assist in our becoming the humane culture you describe, and any suggestions on how to do this?
You're already the humane culture that we describe. You just have not allowed that to come forward. Again, we go back to the dynamic of there are basically two different types of people in the world. There are those that are governed by the dynamic of fear, and there are those that are governed by the dynamic of love. Those that are governed by the dynamic of fear seek to control. And seek to control all of you that are governed by the dynamic of love. The problem is that those of you that are governed by the dynamic of love are live and let live kinds of people. So you allow the dynamic of those that wish to control you. It's easier than stepping up and saying, saying no, exactly. This is a rule, or this is beyond the limit, you know.
It's easier.
Permissiveness only goes so far. Did you ever think you'd hear us say that one?
Maybe not. Well, then the question is, when you say that there are those that are governed by fear and those that are governed by love, in one person's lifetime, can they change that governance? Is that simply a choice?
Certainly, it's learned behavior. It's learned behavior. Everything is learned behavior. You are each a product of your environment. If you were brought up a certain way with a certain dynamics of beliefs, some of you hold those beliefs from the time that you are born, from the first dynamic of imprinting, the first dynamic of incarnation, to the moment of your passing.
So even having a piece of self that can start to question what we believe, which is, there's great opportunity now for that because so many things seem to be changing.
That's absolutely correct. The times of greatest crisis are the times of the greatest opportunity for positive change, which is why the energy keeps pushing you in this direction. And as we reach the dynamic of the end of the year here, kiddos, you are going to be feeling it even more and more. Where are we now? We are in the early part of August. By the end of the month, the eclipse will be a reflection of the dynamics of shadow. Those dynamics, well, what is it? It's a darkening of the sun. So the light is going away. So if you are beginning to see others and they're starting to get you angry, understand something. You're seeing a piece of yourself.
Right. What we refer to as shadowed are those pieces of ourself that we often keep shadowed or hidden from ourselves that we do not own.
And certainly hidden from others.
Well, sometimes other people will see that shadow more than...
Well, that's absolutely so, but, you know.
So they're pieces we don't wish to have seen. And
generally, they are pieces of yourself that you judge as being bad and wrong.
But in owning them within oneself, they would take their power away, and
it begins to take the power away from it if you really do forgive yourself.
Forgiveness is key.
And forgiveness is an incremental journey.
Right. All right. You spoke recently to someone about the fact that forgiveness is incredibly important and is an incremental journey, but it is going to be more effective if there's actually healing that precedes it. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Well, again, it is a dynamic of these are situations where does one become wounded in this sort of way? Are we talking about a physical wounding? We're really not talking about a physical wounding. We're talking about a dynamic of emotional wounding.
Usually emotional.
A dynamic of emotional wounding that sets up behavioral templates, that sets up dynamics of behavior that are repetitive in nature. Right? These are dynamics that we call your soul's journey. These are the things that you have chosen to overcome, chosen to challenge yourself with in this particular lifetime. And so in that sort of sense, if you understand that and you realize that that's part of what you gave yourself, then ultimately you are taking responsibility for all of the things that occurred to you in your life, both positive and negative. And so if you take that level of responsibility of the realization that you have given yourself these challenges within this dynamic of this particular incarnation so that you might transcend them, so that you might move beyond them, so that you might heal them, then you understand that the dynamics are buried within your subconscious. The repetitive dynamics are not in your conscious mind. You're not choosing to have the bad relationship over and over again. You're not choosing to be the alcoholic. You're not choosing to be the drug addict. You're not choosing these things. These are repetitive dynamics that energetically keep repeating themselves until you can begin to speak to the subconscious, begin to change the programming in the depth that it exists. That programming doesn't speak a spoken language because it is responsible for the survival of the infant. The traumatic dynamics of incarnation and imprinting emotionally of mother into the infant could be fatal if it was not for the subconscious, which is there to protect the child, to protect the infant. And it protects the infant by beginning by creating beliefs. The first belief that it often creates is, it's not safe to love. It's not safe to love. And so many of the dynamics in your world will, because belief creates behavior that reinforces belief that creates behavior. Here's the cycle.
Right, and it just repeats and repeats.
That's right. So it will just repeat and repeat and repeat, reinforcing the dynamic until that dynamic has so much energy behind it that you have to deal with it. Or you can know that's the way that it works, and you can begin to take the opportunity to utilize the journey to begin to understand that there is a certain amount of healing that needs to be done in that sort of way. And if it's done on the level of the subconscious, which only understands the language of emotion, metaphor, and symbol. And so if you can begin to understand and operate within that realm,
you can change your program.
You can change the programming and therefore heal any dynamic. Any dynamic. Then, once you have healed that dynamic, it then becomes possible to move into forgiveness.
Real and lasting forgiveness of
others. Well, real and lasting forgiveness when you realize, because when you realize that you've actually gained something positive from it,
it's
now
all
you
right.
may have had to been hit over the head 20 or 30 times. All right? But eventually, if you do get it and you move beyond the dynamic of your, what we would call life lesson, your whole reality changes and the whole dynamics of possibility change. And that is what humanity is facing. As that continues on an individual basis, so that too reflects outwardly into the consensus reality. And that's what you're all experiencing right now, the reflection of Donald Trump, the Republicans against the Democrats, the deep state against everyone, all of this division and conquer, division and chaos, and all of that stuff is intended to keep you off balance so that you cannot claim your true abilities. And so, but again, there are those negative energies, we would say, that are trying to keep this information from you, and yet the divine energy is pushing more and more and more toward this dynamic of discovery of your own ability, discovery of who you really are. And as you remember your realness, you'll realize that almost everything has been intended to put you in a box of belief. You create your reality through your beliefs, so you might as well create the most flexible belief system for yourself possible.
All right. On that note, I think we're going to close for this part of the conversation with SOTU. Thank you.
Time flies when you're having fun.
We're having fun. Thank you, SOTU.
You're welcome.
We, of course, will be back next week.
And so, until the next time we close, sending you peace, sending you happiness, sending you joy.
Thank you for joining us again, and please go to our website, Conversations with SOTU, if you'd like more information, or our sister site, the Peace Genesis Project, which is more geared towards the seeds of that new paradigm of peace that's just beyond our healing ourselves and moving into forgiveness. Weekly podcasts from SOTU called SOTuesdays on the SOTU website, and once a month live with SOTU. If you're in the area or not, you can come and join us through Skype, or you can ask your own personal questions and get unfiltered, unrecorded answers just for you.
Uncensored.
Uncensored, yes, that too. So
right.
Thanks, and we hope to see you again next week.
Thanks, everyone.
You may say I'm a dreamer,